What if the most revealing evidence in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie was never inside a surveillance camera? What if it was never buried inside a Bitcoin wallet or locked inside a federal laboratory waiting for a DNA match? What if the most important details in this entire case were sitting in plain sight the whole time, hiding in a song title, in a poetry book, in a family photograph, in a financial gap that nobody has fully explained? And we have all been so focused on the footage and the forensics that we walked straight past them. Now, if you watched our last video, you already know the timeline. You know what happened at 1:47 a.m. when that camera went dark. You know about the dress rehearsal 9 days before the crime. You know about the 4-hour window, the paper bag, the 6 searches, the impounded vehicle, the cell tower trap. We laid all of that out. No, we did not hold anything back. But here's what kept pulling at me after that video. After all the timelines and the forensics and the behavioral analysis, I kept arriving at a question that none of that evidence fully answered. Not who was on the porch, not what the DNA will say when it comes back from the lab. Something older and more human than any of that. Who is Tomasso cioni when nobody's watching? Not the teacher, not the husband. No, not the man who makes homemade pasta and plays bass in a local band. Who is he underneath the version of himself he has presented to this family and to this investigation for nearly 20 years? Because today, we are not going back to the cameras. Today, we are going inside. Inside the household. Inside the psychology. Inside the details about who these people actually are when the mask comes off. And I'm telling you right now, what I found in that direction is something that the mainstream coverage of this case has not been willing to say plainly. We are also going to talk about a documented, convicted case from a completely different state. A case that gave me a psychological framework I could not have built on my own. Because once you hear it, the Nancy Guthrie investigation is never going to look the same to you. By the time this video is over, you're going to be sitting with a question that is harder than anything we discussed before. Not, where is Nancy? Not who was on that porch. But something that goes deeper than both of those. Is it possible that the person who knows exactly what happened to Nancy Guthrie is someone who sat across from her at a dinner table for nearly 2 decades? Not because they loved her, but because they needed her family to believe they did? Let us get into it. Before I go any further into the Nancy Guthrie investigation, I need to tell you about a man named Daniel Serafini. This is a different case, a closed, convicted case. But stay with me, because this story unlocked something in my understanding of what may have happened to Nancy that nothing else could have opened. Daniel Serafini was a baseball player, drafted in the first round in 1992 with a $350,000 signing bonus. By every external measure, he had made it. But he could never fix his accuracy problem. He bounced around 5 teams over 7 seasons, finished with an ERA of 6.04, got caught using steroids, career over. Over those 7 seasons of failure, Daniel still made $14 million. He squandered every cent on bad investments. And then he married into money, a woman named Erin, whose parents, Robert and Wendy, had a net worth exceeding $20 million. They loved their daughter. They wanted her happy. So they bankrolled the couple, funded their lifestyle, absorbed their losses. They even loaned the couple $1.3 million for a horse ranch that Daniel ran directly into the ground. When Robert and Wendy finally said enough, when they declined to keep funding a failing operation managed by a man who had proven he could not be trusted with resources, Daniel did not respond with gratitude for the years of support they had already given him. He sent them hostile emails with direct threats. So he texted his own wife and said verbatim, "I am going to kill them one day." And on June 5th, 2021, a security camera captured a man in a mask, a ball cap, and a backpack walking up their driveway. Robert was shot execution style, once in the head. He died. Wendy was shot twice and survived, but she was never the same. She took her own life a year later. The motive was money and hatred. Hatred for the very people who had been keeping him alive. And here's the part that stopped me completely. Daniel Serafini did not hate Robert and Wendy because they were cruel to him. He hated them because they had done everything for him and then stopped. The dependency he had come to feel entitled to was withdrawn. And that withdrawal produced something monstrous. There is a phrase that captures this psychology precisely. Do not help a loser. The loser will hate you for it. Now, I want you to pause right here and do a mind exercise with me. Hold the Daniel Serafini profile in your mind. Financially dependent, resentful, entitled, wearing a mask of normalcy for years, while something very different operated underneath it. And now think, with that profile in your mind, about everything you know about the man who drove Nancy Guthrie home on the night of January 31st, 2026. Think about it honestly, because that exercise is going to make everything that follows in this video land completely differently than it would have otherwise. Ready? Let us continue. Before we go further, drop a comment right now. When you held that profile in your mind and thought about this case, did a name surface immediately? Did the parallel feel real to you, or does it feel like a stretch? Tell me. I read every single comment, and I need to know where this community stands before we go deeper. This is Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, a retired educator, a woman who has lived in the same house in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona since 1985, and 41 years in the same home. She has a pacemaker regulating her heart. She takes daily medication she cannot survive without. She is not famous. She never sought the spotlight. But the people around her, that is where the story gets complicated. This is Savannah Guthrie, Nancy's daughter, co-anchor of the Today Show on NBC, one of the most recognized names in American morning television. A woman with an estimated net worth of $40 million. A woman whose face is on screens across America every single morning. A woman who, when her mother disappeared, became the most visible grieving daughter in the country. And then there's the other daughter. This is Anni Guthrie, Nancy's oldest daughter, a poet. She works at the University of Arizona Poetry Center. She lives in Tucson, approximately 4 miles from her mother's home, 10 minutes away. She is the one who is physically present in Nancy's daily life, and the one who shows up when something needs managing, the one who is nearby when Savannah is in New York and Paris, on television. And beside Anni, saying at every dinner, at every family gathering, at every moment of ordinary life shared with Nancy over 20 years, is this man, Tomasso cioni, 50 years old, born in Tuscany, Italy. Moved to Arizona in 2006. Science teacher, bass player, husband. The last confirmed person to see Nancy Guthrie alive. These 4 people. And this is the circle that matters. And today, we are going to look at that circle from an angle that most people have not gone to yet. Let us talk about money, because money is either the motive or the misdirection in every serious case. And in the Nancy Guthrie investigation, the financial picture has been discussed in broad strokes without anyone doing the detailed, specific work of asking what the numbers actually reveal. Here's what we know as verified fact. Tomasso cioni is a science teacher at a charter school in Tucson. His wife Anni is a poet at a university poetry center. Honorable professions, meaningful work, not professions associated with significant financial accumulation. A teacher and a poet. Now, here's the question I cannot get past. Anni and Tomasso currently live in a home valued at approximately $650,000 to $675,000. This is a significant upgrade from a previous property valued at around $379,000. That is a jump of nearly $300,000 in home value. How does a teacher and a poet make that jump? This is not a rhetorical question. It is a financial question that deserves a real answer. Because if the answer is that the Guthrie family, specifically Savannah Guthrie, with her $40 million net worth, contributed to or facilitated that upgrade, then what we are looking at is a financial dynamic with a very specific psychological shape. Think about it. If Savannah helped Annie and Tomasso secure that home so they could live closer to Nancy and serve as her primary caretakers, and I want to be clear, that is a reading of the numbers, not a confirmed fact. Then, what was established in that arrangement was dependency. Financial dependency that comes with unspoken conditions. You live here, you're close to mom, the family supports you. That is not a criticism of Savannah. That would be a loving and practical arrangement for a family, trying to care for an elderly mother from a distance. But from the perspective of the person on the receiving end, particularly if that person has any psychological tendency toward entitlement, toward resentment, toward feeling that their own ambitions have gone unrecognized, that arrangement can curdle over time into something very different from gratitude. And here's what makes this financial picture even more specific. Someone in Tucson, Arizona Googled Savannah Guthrie's NBC salary in December 2025, 2 months before Nancy disappeared. The ransom demand of $6 million did not come from guesswork. It came from someone who had done the math, and someone who understood what Savannah earns, what she could reasonably access, what number would represent real pain without being an impossible demand. An outsider guesses at a number. An insider calculates one. And the person embedded in this family for 20 years, the one who sat at the dinner table, who helped with the property, who knew what conversations Nancy had about money and subscriptions and family finances, that person is not an outsider. Think about Daniel Serafini. Robert and Wendy gave him everything, funded the ranch, paid the bills, and the more they gave, the more entitled he felt, until the moment they said no became the moment everything broke. What happens inside a household that is financially dependent on a famous sister's wealth and goodwill? When that household contains a man who once played in a band, once had creative ambitions, once saw himself as someone with a future beyond a charter school classroom in the Tucson desert, what happens to the ego of a man like that over time? I do not have a clean answer, but I have the question. And in a case with this many unanswered questions, the financial architecture of the household 4 miles from the crime scene deserves far more scrutiny than it has received. Here is a detail that almost nobody covering this case has addressed directly, and I think it deserves to be addressed directly. Tomasso Cioni plays bass in a Tucson band called Early Black. That detail has been reported. What has not been widely reported is what is on the recorded work of that band. The album cover features a serpent, and among the songs recorded and released by Early Black are at least 2 titles that, in the context of this investigation, are almost impossible to read without stopping. Love Murder. Stranger Murder. I want to be precise here, because precision matters. Dark creative work does not make someone a criminal. Artists have explored darkness, violence, and transgression since the beginning of human expression. I am not presenting song titles as evidence of a crime, but here's what I am saying. When investigators build a psychological profile of someone connected to a serious criminal case, they look at everything: the documented behavior, the forensic evidence, but also the patterns of thought a person has put into the world over time. The creative work someone produces is a window into what occupies their mind, what themes they return to, what they consider worthy of artistic attention. A man who chooses to write and record songs called Love Murder and Stranger Murder and places a serpent on his album cover is giving you a window into the interior landscape of his imagination, what he finds compelling enough to craft into art, what images live in the mind behind the mask. That window matters, not as a conviction, as a question. Because here is the thing about masks. Everyone wears one depending on the situation. Most people's masks are not far from who they actually are. They do not have that much to hide. But there are people whose mask is worn constantly, whose real self is so far from the presented self that if it came off, the people closest to them would not recognize the person underneath. And the only ones who ever see those people without the mask are the ones who live with them, the spouse, the one who has seen it slip just once Just briefly, and never said anything. Think about what the public record of Tomasso Cioni actually shows us. A man who has not given a single interview since his mother-in-law disappeared. Not one statement to the press. Not one appearance. Not one written word released publicly. His cooperation with investigators has been confirmed. But cooperation with the investigation and communication with the public are two completely different things. Daniel Serafini went dark. For 2 years. In a 2013 interview, Anni described Tomasso as her greatest teacher, a great manifester, a man who writes poetry with his lifestyle. Those are the words of a woman who loves and admires her husband deeply. But that interview was over 10 years ago. People change, circumstances change. Financial pressure changes people. Unmet ambition changes people. And sometimes the mask that fit perfectly in 2013 starts to feel heavier by 2025. Anni Guthrie is a poet. She has published her own collection of work. And the title of that collection, thus in the context of everything we are discussing today, deserves serious attention. The book is called The Good Dark. It is a collection of witchcraft poems, dark in theme, dark in imagery, exploring the shadow side of human experience through the lens of folk magic and the occult. Now, I want you to hold two things at the same time. A man in that household writes and records songs called Love Murder and Stranger Murder with a serpent on the cover. A woman in that household publishes a poetry collection called The Good Dark, witchcraft poems. Two creative people, married, both drawn consistently and deliberately to the same thematic territory. Darkness, death, the occult, the transgression of ordinary moral and social boundaries. I'm not saying dark art equals dark intent. I'm saying that when we are trying to understand who people are beneath the surface they present to the world, when we are trying to understand the emotional atmosphere inside a specific household at the center of a criminal investigation, the creative work those people choose to produce is one of the clearest available windows. These are not accidental choices. Artists return to the themes that feel most true to them, the images that carry the most psychological weight. Now, the territory they feel compelled to explore because something in their inner world pulls them there. Both people in that household were pulled to darkness. What does that tell us? I am genuinely asking, because I do not have a clean answer. What I have is a question that I believe needs to be part of this conversation. I want to stop here and ask this community something directly. When you look at the creative work coming out of that household, the album titles, the serpent cover, and then the witchcraft poetry collection, does it change anything about how you see these people? Or do you think bringing creative work into a criminal investigation is always unfair? There is no wrong answer here. I want to hear where you actually stand. Drop it below. Look at this image. Look at the warmth between them, the closeness, the bond that is completely real and completely visible. Here's an observation that I have not seen discussed prominently in the coverage of this case, and I think it reveals something important about the emotional architecture of this family. Look at the photographs that circulate publicly in connection with this story. The images Savannah has shared over the years. Images of her family, images of her mother, images that paint a public picture of who the Guthrie family is. Every photograph is Nancy and Savannah, mother and daughter, arm in arm. The bond between them celebrated publicly, warmly, constantly. And Anni? Anni is the daughter who lives 4 miles away from Nancy. The daughter who is present in the practical, daily, unglamorous work of being close to an aging mother. The one who shows up when something needs managing. The one who handles the logistics. The one whose proximity means she is the one who gets called when something is wrong. But every photograph is Nancy and Savannah. When the Paris Olympics happened, Savannah was there, watching, celebrating, living in the public spotlight. Nancy and Savannah in photographs. The celebrated daughter in Paris. The present daughter in Tucson, 4 miles from a woman with a pacemaker. I am not saying Annie Guthrie harbors resentment toward her sister. I do not know that, and that no one outside that family knows that. But I am asking you to think about the human psychology of that dynamic over 20 years. One child becomes the celebrated one, the one whose name the world knows, whose achievements bring the family pride and visibility. The other child becomes the present one, capable, reliable, nearby, but not celebrated. Not the one in the photographs, not the one the world gravitates toward. And beside Annie in all of this, watching the same dynamic play out year after year, is Tomasso. Could that dynamic, watched over nearly 2 decades, contribute to a deep-seated psychological wound in that household? I genuinely do not know, but I think it is a question that deserves to be asked. And I think the fact that almost nobody is asking it is itself significant. Let me take you back to a specific moment in this investigation that happened in public, on camera, in front of reporters, and that most people absorbed without fully registering what they were watching. Sheriff Chris Nanos was giving a press update on the timeline of January 31st. A reporter asked about who had last been with Nancy before she disappeared. And in his response, Sheriff Nanos named Tomasso specifically. He said Tomasso drove Nancy home. Not the family. Not her daughter and son-in-law together. He said Tomasso. And then, almost immediately, he corrected himself. He walked the name back, replaced it with the general phrase, the family drove her home. Now. Verbal corrections happen in press conferences. Investigators sometimes have to be careful about what they confirm publicly to protect the integrity of an ongoing investigation. I am not presenting a single verbal correction as definitive proof of anything, but I am asking you to notice it and to think about what it means. That's when a sheriff names a specific person in a specific role and then immediately walks that back to a general group. It tells you that the specific name carries investigative weight. You do not correct language unless the specific detail matters. You only step back from a name when naming that person, rather than the group creates a legal or strategic issue for the investigation. Sheriff Nanos knew, from a briefing, from an interview, from a document, that Tomasso Cioni specifically was associated with the act of driving Nancy home that night. That detail was precise enough to come out naturally under the live pressure of a press conference. And then he decided not to have said it. Why? If Tomasso driving Nancy home was a neutral, uncontroversial fact that carried no investigative significance, there would be no reason to correct it. You correct language when the language reveals something you are not ready to reveal publicly. The sheriff named Tomasso. Then, the sheriff unnamed him. That is a detail that deserves far more attention than it has received in this investigation. Here is what I need you to think about. The sheriff specifically named Tomasso, then corrected himself in real time. Ashley Banfield cited a law enforcement source, naming Tomasso as a significant investigative focus. The home was searched 6 times. The car was impounded. The septic tank was probed. A paper bag of biological evidence was carried out by federal agents. And Tomasso Cioni has still not said a single public word. At what point does silence stop being a legal strategy and start being something else? What is your honest read on this? Drop it in the comments. I want specific answers, not general feelings. In one of the most emotionally powerful moments of this entire investigation, Savannah Guthrie stood in front of a camera and addressed whoever is responsible for her mother's disappearance directly. She looked into the lens and she said, "It is never too late to do the right thing." I have played that back many times, and I want you to think very carefully about the specific language she chose, not the emotion behind it, but the structure of those words. It is never too late to do the right thing. That is not language you direct at a stranger. Kim, when you are speaking to an unknown predator, someone who selected your mother through external research, someone who has no relationship with your family, you do not frame your appeal around moral redemption. You speak to a stranger with desperation and facts. You talk about the pacemaker, the medication, the physical danger of keeping an 84-year-old woman from her medical care. You appeal to practical self-interest. But it is never too late to do the right thing. That is language for someone who knows what the right thing is. Someone who has a moral framework in which their own action, was a violation they are fully aware of. Someone who knows what this family considers right and wrong because they have been part of it. Someone who has shared meals with Nancy. Someone whose face Savannah knows. Was Savannah talking to a stranger? Or was she looking into that camera and speaking to someone she has known for years? Someone she has watched at a dinner table across from her mother again and again? Someone who, perhaps, she has seen the mask slip on, just once, just briefly, and never forgot it? Someone she has had private concerns about for longer than this investigation has existed? I cannot answer that. I do not know what Savannah knows. No, but the specific language of that plea, the choice of those specific words over all other possible words, has stayed with me since the first time I heard it. And I think it should stay with you too. Let me address the motive question directly, because it is the most important question in this case, and it creates the most legitimate pushback against the theory pointing toward the household 4 miles from Nancy's home. Some people have argued that the financial motive does not make sense, but that a teacher and a poet, even in a $675,000 home, do not obviously benefit in a direct, traceable way from Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. That the Bitcoin ransom, if it was always going to be traced, serves no rational financial purpose for someone in Tomasso's position. These are fair observations. Here's what I think people are getting wrong. The motive in a case like this does not have to be a direct financial transaction. It does not have to be a clean inheritance or a traceable payment. The motive can be the removal of a condition, the dissolution of an obligation, the elimination of the arrangement that has been quietly suffocating someone for years. An 84-year-old mother-in-law with a pacemaker and daily medication represents an ongoing obligation for the household responsible for her care, an ongoing constraint on how life is structured, on what is expected, on what must be given in exchange for the financial support and familial standing that comes with being embedded in the Guthrie family. If that obligation becomes too heavy, if the resentment around it builds over too many years, the motive is not necessarily financial gain. The motive can be escape from the terms of a life that feels like a trap. And there is another layer almost nobody is discussing. Think about what Anni and Tomasso's life actually looks like from the inside. And Savannah is on national television every morning. Her name on the screen. Her face in every family photograph with Nancy. Her success defining how the Guthrie name is understood publicly. She was at the Paris Olympics while Anni and Tomasso were in Tucson, 4 miles away, available, present, obligated. The celebrated daughter gets the photographs. The present daughter gets the responsibility. And the man standing beside the present daughter watches that dynamic play out year after year, not in a house they may not have been able to afford without outside help, while his band stops having gigs and his music fades, and the dream of being something more than a charter school teacher quietly closes. The band stopped performing around 2017. The gigs dried up. Whatever version of a different future Tomasso once imagined for himself, the music, the creative life, the identity beyond the classroom, that chapter closed. And the years kept passing. The celebrated sister kept rising. The photographs kept being taken. The obligation kept being present. Daniel Serafini did not kill Robert and Wendy because he had a rational financial plan for what would happen afterward. He killed them because the dependency and the entitlement and the resentment had accumulated to a breaking point. Because the most powerful feeling in his life was the desire for the arrangement that was suffocating him to simply stop existing. That is the motive the Serafini case teaches us to consider. Not clean financial calculation, emotional accumulation reaching a point of no return, and the Bitcoin ransom sent to TMZ instead of the family. The wallet that has not moved since the moment it was created? What if the ransom was never about the money? What if it was purely about the narrative, establishing for the world that a stranger did this, so that every headline points outward and nobody looks inward toward a dinner table 4 miles away? Or the wallet is silent because the money was never the point. The narrative was the point. And so far, the narrative has held. Let me put everything flat on the table and let you look at it all at once. A man embedded in a wealthy family structure for nearly 20 years. Financially dependent, at least in part, on the goodwill and resources of a family whose famous member earns $40 million. A home that jumped from $379,000 to $675,000 on a teacher and poet's income. A band that stopped performing around 2017. The music that once defined part of his identity, gone. And then an album with a serpent on the cover and songs called Love Murder and Stranger Murder. A wife who published a witchcraft poetry collection called The Good Dark. Every family photograph is Nancy and Savannah. The present daughter and the man beside her, largely absent from the public visual record of a family they lived 10 minutes away from. A sheriff who named Tomasso specifically in a live press conference, and then walked it back in real time. 6 searches of the same household. No, an impounded vehicle, a probed septic tank, a paper bag of biological evidence carried out by federal agents. A law enforcement source placing Tomasso at the center of the investigation. A Bitcoin ransom sent to the media, not the family. A wallet completely silent since the moment it was created. A famous daughter looking into a camera and saying it is never too late to do the right thing. Now take the Daniel Serafini case. The documented, convicted, there's verified reality of a financially dependent man who wore a mask of normalcy for years while resentment built underneath, who eventually put on a different mask, picked up a backpack, and walked up a driveway. Is that psychology impossible here? Is it unthinkable? The Serafini case tells us it is not only thinkable. It happened. It was proven beyond reasonable doubt in a court of law. A man who felt trapped in a dependency he had come to resent, who felt that his own greatness had gone unrecognized, was capable of doing the unthinkable to the very people who had given him everything. That is not a theory. That is a verdict. And the Nancy Guthrie case is still waiting for its own verdict. The DNA is being processed. The cell tower data from January 23rd is being overlaid against February 1st. The paper bag is in a federal laboratory. The Bitcoin wallet is being monitored around the clock, waiting for one login that reveals a location and a name. The answer is not far away. When it comes, one of 2 things will happen. Every detail we laid out today will crystallize into a pattern that was always pointing in one direction. The darkness in the album, the poetry book, the financial gap, the silence, none of it coincidence. All of it signal. Signal that was there the whole time for anyone willing to look. Or everything dissolves. The DNA points to a stranger no one has considered. The cell tower data produces an unknown name. And Tomasso Cioni is exactly what he appears to be on the surface. A quiet man from Tuscany whose life was destroyed by proximity to an unspeakable crime. A man whose silence was simply grief, whose music was simply art, whose financial situation was simply ordinary life. I do not know which of those 2 outcomes is true. That is the honest answer. But I know the question this investigation forces us to sit with, the question that the Daniel Serafini case made impossible to avoid. Is a financially dependent man embedded in a family structure that sustains him, watching the celebrated sister receive what the present sister provides, writing songs about love and murder, living in the good dark, capable of doing the unthinkable to the family, holding the keys to his entire life? The Serafini case answered that question with a conviction. This case is still building toward its answer. And Tomasso, if you are watching this, and there is a real chance that you are, I want to speak to you directly for a moment, not with anger, not with a verdict, with a straightforward observation. You have had every single day since February 1st to step in front of a camera and fill the gaps that the investigation and the internet and videos like this one are filling for you. Not to confess anything, not to implicate yourself, simply to be a human being in public, to show the world the man Annie described in that 2013 interview, the teacher who has shaped hundreds of young minds, the husband, the person who loved Nancy Guthrie and is devastated by what happened to her. The people who believe you are innocent are waiting for exactly that. They want to say, there he is. There is the quiet man from Tuscany. Let them say it. Because right now, your silence is doing the opposite of protecting you. Now, every day that passes without your voice, someone else's voice fills the space. And that voice, including this one, is asking questions that your silence makes impossible to answer in your favor. What are you protecting, Tomasso? Who does the silence serve? Because from where the public is standing right now, it is not serving you. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for weeks. She is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker. Her medication is still on the nightstand of the home she has lived in since 1985. And someone connected to this investigation knows exactly what happened on the night of January 31st, 2026. Whether that someone is a stranger who has never been found, or the person who watched Nancy walk through her front door, drove away into the Tucson night, and came back 4 hours later, that is the question that will define this case. The DNA does not care about song titles or poetry books or financial gaps. It holds whatever truth was pressed into a glove lining and against a door frame at 2 in the morning. And that truth is closer to surfacing than most people realize. We will be here when it does. I have one final question, and I want every person watching this to answer it before they close the video. Out of every detail we covered today, the Serafini parallel, the album titles, the serpent cover, the poetry book, the house upgrade, the photograph pattern, the sheriff's slip, Savannah's choice of words in that plea, what is the one thing that landed hardest for you? The detail you had not fully thought about before today. Not what you already knew from following this case. The new thing. The thing still sitting with you right now. Drop it in the comments and tell me why it matters. Be specific. Because the sharpest observations in this investigation are not coming from press conferences. They are coming from people like you who are willing to look at the details everyone else is walking straight past. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because when this case breaks, and it will break, you need to be here for it. Nancy Guthrie, still missing, still waiting, and somewhere out there, someone knows exactly why.